Hob, the ghost of Linehorn. They called him Hob, though no one remembered why anymore. Maybe it was short for something long forgotten, Herbert perhaps. Or maybe it came from the way he walked, like he was always dragging something behind him. Not physically. No, he was tall and wiry, lean muscle wound tight over bone like rawhide over frame. His shoulders were squared and his gait was purposeful. But there was a weight in the way he moved, as if some invisible chain clanked behind each step. His face was sunburnt and wind-bitten, carved by the land itself. Never smiling, never scowling, just set in stone. When Hob entered a room, talk didn't die out from fear, but from confusion. People couldn't decide if he was dangerous or just deeply strange. And so they left him alone. He rode alone, ate alone, slept alone, and worked like the devil owed him. Linehorn was a dry patch of cattle country, out past Black Claw Ridge, the kind of land that blistered soft men and burned through arrogance. But Hob never flinched. He fixed fences, wrangled colts, cleaned rifles, and moved through storms like he was born inside them. He didn't talk much. Some said he ate less than a child, and yet he commanded space. Horses trusted him. That said everything. A half-wild gelding no one else could saddle would lower its head for Hob. And men, they tolerated him, that's all. Nobody called him a friend. Even the foremen who relied on him more than anything didn't dare ask where he came from or what he'd done before Linehorn. The unspoken truth was this: Hob belonged to the land more than the men did. And if he carried ghosts with him, he never shared their names. The Joke Bride. It was Lars Caldwell who pushed things too far, as men like him tend to do. Lars had a laugh soaked in moonshine and a cruelty that simmered slow, like a coal left to smolder in the dark. He'd been on Linehorn 5 years long enough to think he was second to the boss, though no one else thought so. His riding was sloppy, and his tongue too loose, but he told stories well and made the younger hands feel braver than they were. He hated Hob. Or maybe he hated the way Hob didn't flinch. Quiet men made loud men louder. So when spring came raw and wet across the flats, Lars saw an opportunity. One morning, with the crew half awake and the dust still wet from night rains, Lars strutted into the yard, with a grin stretched wide as prairie sky. Behind him walked a woman or girl, maybe depending how you measured pain. She had long, dull hair, braided tight a limp in her left leg, that twisted her stance slightly sideways, like she was always trying to walk away and couldn't. "Got you a bride," Hob Lars crowed. "Figure you'd want something broke same as you." The words drew laughter, uneven, half-nervous. The kind of laughter that cut. She didn't flinch. Her eyes, darker than storm water, scanned the yard with caution, not fear. Hob watched her quietly. Then he asked, not loud but clear, "What's her name?" Lars blinked. "Hell if I know. Picked her up from Dan's lot outside Bramblegate. Said she'd been walking north. Sold her for 2 bags of feed and a busted rifle." Then the woman spoke. Calm. "No one sold me. I bartered for passage." Lars backhanded her, not hard but sharp, enough to leave silence. She staggered but didn't cry out, just looked at him like a clock unwinding backward. And that's when Hob moved, not fast, not loud, just forward. "No more," he said. "She's not yours. Not mine unless she chooses it." Lars muttered a joke and walked away. But something shifted in the air. The woman stayed, and the wind seemed to turn in her favor. The quiet accord. She slept in the loft above the tack room. No one told her to leave. Hob didn't set rules, didn't offer kindness either, just space. That was enough. She swept floors, cleaned stirrups, brushed the half-wild horses others wouldn't go near. The way she moved, despite the limp, was careful, deliberate. The animals watched her, hesitant at first, then drawn in. She didn't feed them sugar cubes or speak soft words, but they came to trust her, the same way they had trusted Hob. When she spoke, her voice had weight, not volume, but presence. You listened because you knew she wasn't wasting breath. After a few days, she told him her name Mara, just Mara. No last name, no place claimed. Hob didn't press. He understood what it meant to be without origin. By the time summer sun cracked the dirt in the pens, the men had stopped laughing at her. The joke bride was mending leather, setting snares for coyotes, and talking to Hob like he was real, not some shadow propped up in a saddle. And for the first time in years, Hob felt seen. Proving ground. When the rains came late that year, and the boss needed riders to run fence along the northern cut, Hob made a choice that turned heads. He took Mara. Not riding pillion behind him like some passenger, but mounted on her own horse. A bay gelding half broke, and mouthy the kind that bit at anyone who dared approach. The other hand snickered, none louder than Lars. "She can't ride," he scoffed. "She'll fall by the second mile." "She'll ride better than you," Hob replied, and left it at that. Mara didn't argue. She mounted up, legs swinging, awkward but confident. The first 3 days were hell. She came back bloody at the thighs, fingers blistered, back stiff like a board. But she said nothing, not once. On the 4th day, she stayed in the saddle from dawn to dusk without needing help to dismount. By the 5th, she rode like she was born to it. Out on the plains with the wind whispering low through sun-bleached grass, and the fence line trailing like a black ribbon across the horizon, Mara and Hob rode in silence. The kind of silence that's full, not empty. They shared coffee that tasted like dirt and stories that came in fragments. She never told him who crippled her. He never asked. He didn't speak of why he never smiled. She didn't press. They knew. Some people build trust with words. Others build it with wounds that don't need explaining. Blood and fire. The first raid came under a moonless sky, the kind of night when even coyotes hold their breath. 7 riders wrapped in red kerchiefs like masked wolves stormed the Linehorn pasture. Shots cracked through the dark. 2 men went down before anyone was fully awake. The south barn, lit up in flame, 50 head of cattle scattered into the flats. Hob was on his feet before the shouts reached the bunkhouse. Smoke poured through the cracks in the walls. His pistol was already in hand when he caught sight of Mara, barefoot, limping fast, face hard, with purpose. She didn't ask questions. Just grabbed a lasso and Hob's spare rifle off the wall. He didn't stop her. They rode into the firelight, chasing shadows on horseback, tracking hoof prints in churned-up soil. By dawn, they had found 2 of the rustlers alive barely. One was roped at the wrists and bleeding from the mouth, where Mara had cracked him clean with a stirrup iron. The other laughed when he saw her limp spat blood in the dirt. She said nothing. She broke his front teeth with the butt of the rifle. No one called her a joke after that. Not even Lars. Earned respect. By midsummer, Mara had her own horse, not a leftover, not a cast-off, but a real-blooded dungeon gelding from the winter crop. One of the young ones. No one else could get close to him without risking a kick to the gut, but with her he softened. She named him Bristle, rode him bareback for a week until he learned her rhythm, the tilt of her weight, the way her bad leg pulled her body to one side like she was leaning into the wind. It wasn't a pretty ride. She sat crooked back, straight knees high, like a comet falling sideways, but no one who watched her would have called her weak. Not anymore. The raid had left its scars. 2 good men buried, 4 others limping through their days. The boss, old and dry-eyed, started hiring green boys just to fill the bunk beds. That made the crew nervous. The work turned harsher, the nights longer, the air heavier with unsaid things. Mara didn't break. She worked harder, slept out with the herds. Sometimes didn't come in for days, just circled the pastures with bristle rifle strapped across her chest. She learned to read the hills like Hob, every cut in the grass, every shift in the wind. At some point she started fixing gear for the others, not for coin, but for calm. A quiet saddle, a well-oiled bit, a steady stitch, these things could keep men sane. There was a power in being useful, and it changed things faster than fear ever did. Even Lars, who still simmered with spite, stopped speaking to her. He acted like she was a ghost, but men like Lars don't forget slights, they let them fester, turning black inside. And Mara, she just kept moving, the silent threat. Linehorn had never been a peaceful place, but what came next pulled it into something darker. First it was the cattle found in the creek bellies, split hides peeled back like butcher paper. No bullet holes, no predator tracks. Just the red ruin of their bodies, and painted above it on the rock a white handprint. Always the white. No name, no note, no claim of responsibility, just paint like bone dust smeared by something that did not care for speech. Then came the dogs. Half the kennels emptied overnight. No barking, no struggle. Just open doors, paw prints that led nowhere, and silence too still to be natural. The men stayed close after that, rifles slung low, eyes sharper. Even the sky seemed to lean in like the air was listening. The boss sent out riders, north past the shale bluffs, east into the flats. Some returned with news: empty farms, abandoned camps, stories of shadows that watched but didn't strike. Others came back with nothing but wide eyes and quiet mouths. And one never came back at all. It was Mara who caught the sign first, a shimmer of smoke curling where it shouldn't, a twist in the wind down in the rocklands where the cliffs cut the light to ribbons. She and Hob rode in rifles on their backs, words left behind. First contact. The trail was faint, more suggestion than evidence. Ash on the wind, a flicker of something unnatural. They dismounted at a narrow break between 2 bluffs, bare stone walls etched by time and memory. That's where they found it, not a full camp, just a ghost of one. A fire pit still warm, a piece of red cloth torn and jammed into the fork of a tree like an offering. Symbols carved into the stone, circles crossed with slashes, chains in patterns, the kind of markings that didn't want to be understood. Mara approached slowly. She didn't touch the carvings at first, just looked. Her fingers hovered. Then they dropped, pressed flat against the cold rock. Her breath caught. A shiver passed through her, not from fear, but recognition. They were here, she whispered. But we're too late. Hob didn't ask what she felt. He didn't need to. He watched her face change like she'd stepped into something buried inside her bones. Something remembered, not learned. They rode back in silence. Behind them the wind picked up, carrying the scent of burned pitch and old blood. Ahead, Linehorn waited restless. Back at the spread, the men were sharpening knives more often than needed. Meals half-eaten. Every knock at the gate brought rifles to shoulders. The younger boys drank too much. One of them, Elty, a red-haired kid, not yet 17, tried to run south. He made it as far as the ridge. They found him at dawn, face down, arrow in his spine. White paint streaked down his cheeks like war paint or war tears. The message was written in blood. No one leaves. Blood price. The boss didn't waste time after that. Trenches were dug. Old war tricks brought back from memory trip ropes through brush barrels of sand hidden near the fences. He called in allies too. Hard men and harder women from the adjacent spreads. Veterans of the Kansas border wars. Ranch widows who kept pistols under their aprons and knew how to shoot between ribs. They came because they'd heard what was brewing, because they remembered what silence meant when it arrived without cause. Mara trained them, not because she was told to, but because she was better than anyone else. She moved with her limp like it didn't exist anymore. Her voice, once quiet, now cracked like a whip. Commands snapped off her tongue with precision, and when she spoke, people listened. Not because she was loud, but because she didn't need to be. Hob stood off to the side watching her, watching the way the others deferred to her, how they tilted their shoulders when she passed, how the greenhorns practiced twice as hard when she was near. He didn't feel threatened by it, just proud. Something old and bright in his chest he didn't have words for. Then one night a rider came from Hollow Creek. He was already dying when he reached the yard. Face torn, breath rattling. Fell from the saddle like a sack of wet grain. His last words, "They're coming." 3 days later, the siege began. The turn. They didn't come like raiders. They came like ghosts. At dusk, when the cattle grew nervous and the sky burned crimson, the first siege fell. No horns, no war cries, just movement. Shadows between trees. Dozens of them, rifles cracking, arrows slicing air. White hands, faces darkened with ash eyes empty of reason. These weren't outlaws looking for loot. They were soldiers of something older, colder. The defenses held barely. The old trenches slowed them down, gave Linehorn's rifles just enough time to fire back. But it wasn't clean. The barns burned. A lookout tower collapsed in smoke. One rider took an arrow to the neck. Another never made it out from the fire. Through it all, Mara moved like a storm. She climbed the silo ladder, took position beneath the lightning-split sky, and rained down lead with surgical precision. Hob, watching from below, saw something shift in the enemy line hesitation. Not fear, not yet, but confusion. Like they hadn't expected her, like something in their dead rituals had failed to warn them of her. By dawn, the attackers vanished into the tree line, silent again. No boasts, no threats, just smoke rising from Linehorn's wounds and frost clinging to blood-dark soil. The ranch stood, but only just. The confession. They found her later that day alone by the stables, bandaging a gash on her thigh. Her hands shook slightly, not from pain, but memory. Hob approached, sat beside her without a word. She didn't look up. They marked me once, she said, voice low. Years ago, before Bramblegate. He said nothing, just waited. I was 13. My father sold me to a trader. Said the limp made me cheaper. I didn't understand what was coming, but I learned fast. They camped near a dry canyon, men with white paint on their hands. They thought I was breakable. Her hands tightened on the bandage. I cut a man's throat with a mule shoe. Ran north. Been running since. She met his eyes, then not for comfort, but for confirmation. They wear white to claim their cleansing weakness, but it's not strength they serve, just cruelty, dressed in fire and ritual. Hob didn't reach for her, didn't offer some empty solace. He nodded once. "They didn't expect me to live," she added. "I did." He saw her clearly then, not as a survivor, not as a fighter, but as something harder to name. Something rising. Something the land itself might kneel to if it had breath. After that, they didn't call her broken. They called her the Pride. A name in fire. The stories spread faster than the wind across the flats. Not about the siege that was common enough in those times. It was her. The limping woman who fired from the silo like she'd been born with powder in her veins. The one who moved like scar tissue come to life and left no room for doubt. They said she made men stand taller, not because she coddled them, but because she expected them to rise. Even the boss started deferring to her, quietly at first, then openly. She walked the lines during watch rotations, gave orders, fixed mistakes, and took no credit. She earned every glance, every nod, every space cleared when she passed. The younger riders started calling her the Pride around the fire. Half joke, half reverence. It stuck. But not everyone liked it. One night after a long ride beyond Devil's Spine, Mara returned to find her bunk soaked in piss. Her coat missing her boots, slashed and tossed. She said nothing. Just lit a match, pulled her knife, and sat on the bunk until dawn, barefoot in the frost, Bristle tethered outside, silent as his rider. Hob saw it, said nothing. That evening he handed her a new pair of boots, heavy-stitched, strong. She didn't thank him. She didn't need to. Later that week, one of Lars's pups mouthed off, called her crippled and lucky. She beat him unconscious behind the barn, left a tooth in the mud beside the trough. No one touched her bunk again. A name in fire, Linehorn, wasn't safe. Not yet, but it was different. Something had taken root in the place, hard to name, harder to kill. It wasn't just fences rebuilt or barns patched with fresh timber. It was quieter strength, a kind that didn't brag. Mara wasn't officially in charge, but everyone knew who people looked to when things cracked. Even the boss, old and coughing more than he breathed, began taking her with him on supply runs. Hollow Creek, Combs, Pine Barrel. Hob rode too when asked. The three of them moved through ghost towns and half-dead outposts, gathering grain, bartering for medicine, watching the world decay around them. The law didn't reach that far anymore. And when it did, it came too late. Then came the town burned black, Pine Barrel still smoldering. The feed store was ash, the stables a charred skeleton, blood smeared across the dirt in streaks. 7 townsfolk laid out like warnings, hands tied behind backs, eyes open to the indifferent sky. Their killers had left no name, no banner. Just a new mark, white paint streaked across hands and necks. Different from the last group. Organized, clean. In the silence of that ruined place, Mara moved like a shadow. At a dry well she stopped, kneeling beside a girl, same height, same limp leg broken backward like a twisted echo of her own past. She touched the girl's neck, then let her hand fall. No heartbeat, no blood moving beneath. Hob stood beside her hat, low over his eyes. Said nothing. They didn't bury the girl. There wasn't time. But Mara did something else. She placed a strip of cloth across her chest, black wool red-stitched, a token, a memory. They rode back to Linehorn with the wind at their backs, and dread riding with them. Respect and rumors. That night the boss didn't pace or spit or swear. He stood before every rider and spoke with a kind of weary finality. "War's coming," he said. "Not the kind you can put out with a bucket or a bullet. This is the kind where men become beasts, where lines blur and silence kills more than steel. Mara already knew. So did Hob. The others learned quick. Training intensified. Pairs on patrol, trip lines rechecked nightly, ammunition counted and recounted. Fire kept low, sleep grew light, and the cold when it came arrived heavy and bone deep. Mara began drilling with the rifle every day, not just shooting but refining. She favored one with a shortened stock easier to brace against her shoulder. Her limp made traditional stance impossible, but she adapted, found angles that steadied her. Her aim was slow but surgical. She didn't miss. Hob rode with her more tracking signs through the dead grass. Coyotes had gone quiet. Even the birds seemed to watch from a distance. She learned his silences. He learned the way her eyes warned before her mouth ever moved. They didn't need words. Not anymore. Blood price. Then Lars disappeared, gone before dawn, his bunk empty, his rifle taken, but nothing else disturbed, just a gap in the morning like a tooth knocked out during sleep. The boss said, "Leave it. Man like that disappears on his own terms." But Mara didn't believe it. Neither did Hob. 2 days later, they found Lars's horse. It was standing alone at the edge of Thorn Hollow, foam dried on its neck, blood smeared across its muzzle. No rider, just a saddle dark with soak-through stains, and on the rear strap a single deliberate mark, a white handprint painted in thick strokes across the cantle. This wasn't wandering. This was message. When they rode back to Linehorn, no one made jokes. No one asked questions. But Mara, in the dark of the barn that night, whispered to Hob, "This ain't like the others. This ain't petty theft or spooked cattle. This is something bigger, something older." He nodded. She unwrapped a cloth from around her wrist. Black wool, red thread stitched into an old symbol. "What's that?" he asked. "Debt," she said. "Owed to me by men who walk painted white." He didn't ask more. Some truths are best left buried in fire. The last warning. The second winter came hard and fast like a punishment. Snow layered thick across the pastures, muffling sound and spirit alike. Riders huddled in bunkhouses, wrapped in blankets that never felt warm enough. Even the coyotes stayed hidden. Then, in the middle of one frozen night, Mara woke no noise, no dream, just a pull, deep in her chest like an unseen string, yanked tight. She sat up, boots on in seconds, Bristle already awake and alert outside the stable. There was a wrongness in the air, subtle but sharp. She moved toward the south ravine where the ground dipped low and the wind changed pitch. Hob caught her at the gate, eyes heavy with worry. "You sure I can feel it?" she said. They circled wide through the trees, boots muffled in pine needles, until they reached the old windmill where shadows leaned the wrong way. That's where they found the bodies. 2 men, hung by the ankles from a low beam, throats cut in ribbons. One had been the stable boy, barely 20, still clumsy with a lasso. The other was old Tamsin, half-blind, mostly deaf, hadn't held a gun in years. Harmless men. Mara crouched. "They're feeding fear," she said. "Making an example." Hob didn't reply. He didn't have to. They followed the trail, mud prints smeared with ash, faint outlines of boot heels near the orchard. That's when they saw them, 6 figures slipping toward the side barn, soaked cloaks clinging to skin. One carried a jar of pitch, another a fuse coil, fire starters. Hob shot first, clean and fast. Dropped the one with the pitch like a sack of grain. Mara took the next through the gut. The others scattered, but Linehorn was awake now. Doors flung open. Riders poured from the bunkhouse, half-dressed, fully armed. The barn was saved, but barely. The last attacker, small and quick, hurled a lit fuse into the hay cart. Flame bloomed sudden and wild. Mara didn't hesitate. She dove in hands. Bear yanked the fuse out, kicked the cart over scattered wet straw until the spark choked on dampness. Her palms blistered. Her breath shook. She didn't care. The confession at the altar. Morning light revealed 6 white-hand bodies. Not one bore a name, but each carried scars, deep, deliberate carvings into flesh. Symbols, rituals. One had the pattern etched inside her thigh. Mara stared too long at that one, and Hob saw it. "They're not done," she said. "They won't stop." The boss didn't argue. "Then we take it to them." Over the next 4 days they planned the raid. Mara drew maps from memory, not imagination, not guesswork, but lived pain. She remembered the canyon, the tunnels, the way the smoke smelled. She marked the cave mouths by hand. They chose 9 riders, no more. The best, the ones who'd stopped flinching when bones snapped. Jessica, once cavalry, hung for killing her own commander. Lo, a dead-eyed boy of 17 who never missed, and Mara, no longer called broken. They moved under a moonless sky. No torches, no horses, just boots, breath, and steel. Hob took the rear. Mara led. Inside the canyon they crept through tunnels thick with blood stink and echo. Then Mara saw him, one of them. Not the same man who'd once owned her, but close. Same voice, same teeth. Standing shirtless on a makeshift altar, arms painted white, preaching in sound, not words. Mara stepped forward, limping on purpose. No signal, no plan. He raised a hand like she still belonged to him. She shot him in the chest, ashes and altars. Gunfire split the silence. Screams echoed in the tunnels. Jessica's war cry rang through stone. Lo vanished into smoke, knife in hand. Hob fired close-range buckshot, tearing ribs apart. Mara didn't blink. Her rifle emptied fast, too fast. Then she swung the stock, jaw, throat, skull, one by one. When the chaos cleared, 2 of their 9 were gone. Jessica took a round to the belly. Lo was found hours later, fingers crushed, blood dried at the edges of his mouth. But the white hand camp was gone, burned to ash. The altar split in 2. Mara stood atop it, not shaking, not smiling, just breathing. They didn't bring the bodies home. Instead, they buried them in the canyon where the war had been fought and ended. Jessica burned on the ridge, her name spoken by fire. Lo lived barely. Hob carried him back through the gulch, his breath-shallow eyes searching. "Where's Mara?" he whispered. She stayed behind. Only briefly. She painted the altar using her blood and their ash. A new symbol, not of fear, but of reclamation. A figure bent once, now standing in flame. Then she walked away. The war that never came back. When Mara returned to Linehorn, the hills had begun turning green again. Spring was cracking open the cold, but nothing truly softened. The air still held tension like a string pulled tight, not yet released. Linehorn had survived, but survival leaves a mark. The buildings bore scorch lines. The land remembered blood. So did the people. Mara changed too. Not in the way she walked, her limp still came back when she was tired, but in the way she moved through silence. It had deepened, turned denser like a well no one could reach the bottom of. She spoke less than before, and even then only when it mattered. And still she was the one they came to. When nearby spreads sent riders asking for alliance, they asked to speak with her. Her, not the boss, not the old hands. Her. The boss didn't mind. He had grown weary and proud and weary. He sat more than he stood, now the cough taking more from him with every moon. He let her handle the scouts, the strategies, the strange questions that came with leadership. He watched her from the porch like a man watching the last fire he would ever trust to burn. Hob noticed things others missed. The way she flinched when a child's voice cracked too high. How she never turned her back on mirrors. How she woke sometimes in the night, gasping, fists clenched, refusing to be touched. Not even by him, but she always came back to herself. Always. Like something in her had become indestructible not by force, but by choice. They built a tower together, just a lookout post above the stables. Not for war, not for order, just a high place to see the horizon every morning. She liked that, said it made her feel early again. The final watch word traveled fast in those years, twisting across counties like wind through canyon walls. Not just about the white hand slaughter, but about the woman behind it. The one who had bled and burned and limped her way into legend. They called her the Pride, now without mockery. Not because of what she'd done, but because of what she'd made others become in her presence. Other spreads sent for her, some for help, some for hope. She refused most, but not out of pride. She only took the ones that truly needed saving. Broken ranches, widow-led camps, orphaned towns with more ghosts than grain. And when she came not as a savior, but as a mirror. She taught them to shoot, to ride, to listen to silence the way she did. How to bury tools where no man would think to look. How to use pain, not wear it. Some tried to call her outlaw. She let them. Others called her commander. She ignored them. Then one winter, a U.S. Marshal rode into Linehorn. He wore starched sleeves and steel eyes, 2 deputies at his flank. He carried papers in his vest, arrest warrants from 5 territories' orders to detain a woman known as the Pride. He said she was harboring fugitives, arming radicals, undermining peace. Mara let him speak. Then she went into the bunkhouse and returned with a ledger, leather-bound pages worn from firelight and sweat. Inside names, dates, accounts. Ranches saved, slavers stopped, children returned. Blood shed for the right reasons. A record of every fight, every scar that had saved someone else. She handed it to him. You came with paper. Now you leave with truth. He didn't argue. When he rode out, his boots were muddy. His star was no longer polished. No one called her broken. That spring Hob found her standing outside the gate, wind tugging her braid like a child asking questions. You thinking of leaving? He asked. Not yet, she replied. Where then, where I'm needed? He paused. You're needed here. She turned and really looked at him for the first time since she'd arrived at Linehorn with dust on her skirt and silence in her bones. Her smile was slight, sharp at the edges, meant to last. I know, she said. That's why I stayed. There was no kiss, no embrace. That wasn't how they worked, but they stood together a long time watching the land turn gold beneath a high wind. And the other riders didn't gawk, didn't whisper. They watched with respect because they knew the story, how a girl no one wanted had been handed over like bad luck, how a quiet man had made space instead of judgment, and how she, crippled, hardened, quiet, had become the reason they still stood at all. The limp never left her. Neither did the scars. But by then, no one called her broken. They called her the Pride, the last ride. Mara rode less in her final years. Her hair silvered, her hands stiffened, but she never stopped. Not really. She still rose early, still mended saddles, still walked the fences when the wind changed or the coyotes howled too close. The fire in her had simply shifted no longer, flaring outward but burning inward like coal pressed into diamond. One night when the stars hung low and heavy over the land, she climbed the tower alone. No announcement, no farewell. Just her rifle across her knees, and the vast sky stretched open like a promise. Some say Hob was waiting for her just past the fence-line, coat stirring in the breeze, had pulled low over a face the years had softened. Others say she didn't see anything at all, that she just sat still for a long time until the wind quieted and her breath followed. They found her at dawn, eyes closed, body upright, rifle clean, no pain, just peace. They buried her beside him under the same tree that bent with time but never broke. No preacher, no sermon, just riders old and young standing in silence, hats in hand. On the marker, M-A-R-A, the pride, nothing broken. And from then on, when young riders asked who she was, they were told this: she was given away to shame a man. She became the reason others stood, and the land remembers her footsteps. Even the limp, especially the limp, because that's where the power started and never stopped. The legacy of Linehorn. Linehorn endured, long after the battles were over, after the war paint had faded and the old names vanished into dust. The land still bore their memory. The bunkhouse remained sturdier than ever. The tower stood watch. Children, those born on the ranch and those taken in, grew up with stories in their veins and steadiness in their hands. They learned to read tracks before they could read words, learned to shoot with calm fingers, learned that silence could be as loud as a war cry. Mara became more than a story. She became a measure. When someone faced loss, they asked themselves, what would the pride do? When a young rider stumbled, someone always said, remember the limp. Not as weakness, but as strength with roots. Other ranches tried to mimic what Linehorn had. They borrowed tactics, borrowed trainers. But what they couldn't borrow was what Mara left behind: the sacred weight of resilience. The kind that doesn't boast, the kind that stays. The white hands were never spoken of with reverence, only as a warning, and though no one ever saw them rise again, no one doubted someone had ensured they stayed buried. And no one asked how. The final word. The last record of Mara's life wasn't carved in stone or written in a ledger. It was felt in the way riders touched the gatepost as they rode out, 3 fingers silent promise. In how they cleaned their rifles, slow, careful, respectful. In how no one ever mocked a limp again. Not in that land, not among those who knew. No monument was built for her. No statue, no shrine. But the spring still ran cool and clear where she had once dug with her hands. Its name remained Pride Spring. Riders drank from it before long journeys. New hands were told its origin before they were ever given a horse. Sometimes late at night, when the coyotes howled just wrong, the elders would look toward the tower and swear they saw her shadow there just watching. Quiet, steady, as she always had, because the land remembers, and so do the people, and that in the end is what matters. Not how loudly you fought, but how deeply you stayed.